So, welcome to this delicious episode in the Iowa Files. So, I want to thank all of you who are here today. I want to thank our members and donors and the folks who make it possible to do this live streaming and do the programming. The Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Library, Scott and Diana Hatfield, and our members and donors. That could be you. So our guest today, Wini Moranville, was born in Des Moines and graduated from Roosevelt High School, along with my husband. Yep. Yes. They still let them in the building, which is frankly amazing to me. But her passion for food and storytelling has taken her all over the world. In addition to being a multi-cookbook author since 1997, she has also worked as an editor and feature writer on countless cookbooks and websites and publications, from Better Homes and Gardens here in Des Moines to Bonjour Paris. Okay. During Wini's 15-year stint at the Des Moines Register, she was the Datebook Diner critic and wrote more than 750 restaurant reviews for the paper. That's a lot of eating. And I know, she's still so darn skinny. It drives me crazy.
You have not seen me in a swimsuit. You won't.
If anybody wants to see a picture of Wini in the swimsuit, that'll be a $10 donation to the Historical Society. So, get ready to hear about Baker's Cafeteria, these long lost but certainly not forgotten restaurants in Des Moines. Wini Moranville.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's always a real honor to be asked to give a speech or, to give a talk. And it's just so gratifying when people come. So thank you very, very much for being here. It was a cold day. It was windy. As I walked in, I thought, I'll be really glad if 10 people are here. And it's just nice to see you all. And I want to extend my great appreciation to Gail Brubaker from the West Des Moines Historical Society, who was just up here, for inviting me to do this talk, and to the West Des Moines Public Library for hosting us in this very nice space. Today's talk is rooted in the chapters of my recent memoir. The chapters, specifically the chapters that reflect on the years that I spent working in some of Des Moines' most iconic restaurants. When I first began writing this book, my plan was to focus on the 25 years as a restaurant critic, reviewing the Des Moines dining scene from 1997 to the present. I wrote the Des Moines Register till about 2012, and then I wrote for DSM Magazine, and now I have a Substack column. So for 25 years, I've been covering the Des Moines dining scene. And I really thought that I would focus just on these 25 years and what it was like to be a critic, because I would get the same kind of questions all the time. Were you recognized? What were your favorite restaurants? How has the Des Moines dining scene changed? What was it like to give mean reviews? It wasn't fun, and I didn't like to think of it as mean. But anyway, I would get all these questions. I thought, there's a book here. I'm going to write a book. But as I started writing the book, I also realized that, and I hadn't even really thought about it that much, that my perspective as a reviewer was profoundly shaped by my earlier years working in Des Moines restaurants, from the age of 14 to nearly 24. So while the book itself has lots of chapters about, being, the curious balancing act of being recognized when dining out, getting cornered in supermarkets and malls when people saying, I read your article, or I read your review of such and such, and I went there and it wasn't very good, and you said it was good. There are things that were really, really challenging about doing this. I'm not saying it was a hard job, but it had its challenges like that. I found myself a few times at the center of a social media firestorm. So that's not fun. And, I write about the peaks and valleys. I reflect on the wonderful changes in the food scene and how gratifying it was to have a front row seat on that. So many chapters do reflect on that. But what I'm talking about today are the chapters that reflect on the history that I had from 1970 to present. Each of the establishments that I worked in taught me lessons that went far beyond cooking or service. I saw firsthand the dedication and sheer hard work that drive this industry. I learned what it means to create not just a meal, but a sense of belonging for everyone who walks through the doors, both the guests and the employees. And most importantly, I came to understand the true essence of hospitality. I feel that those years offer a window into the restaurant culture of a very different time in Des Moines. My experiences offer a glimpse of what we've lost and what we've gained in the past 40 years. So I'm going to start with Baker's Cafeteria. And how many of you remember Baker's Cafeteria? Okay, and let's say that I just have to, do you mind if I point it out? Vicki Baker is here. She was, Russ Baker was one of the owners, and that's his wife. So anyway, it's always an honor to have you here, Vicki. Thank you so much. I'm going to start talking, I'll tell you a little bit about Baker's Cafeteria. But first I want to talk about, a lot of this book discusses why we go out to eat. What is it we're looking for beyond good food when we go into a restaurant? And I think there's a clue in the title of this book, love. And yet, is it truly reasonable to wish for something like love from a restaurant? Famed 20th century chef James Beard, it seems, thought so. Quoted in the New York Times, renowned New York City restaurateur Danny Meyer recalled, James Beard famously told people that when he was stopped in airports and asked what his favorite restaurant was, he answered, "It's the same as yours. It's the one that loves me the most." The hospitality that Danny Meyer provides in his restaurants is legendary. I've had the great luck to experience it myself at Gramercy Tavern in New York City, where there was an unmistakable warmth and expertise to the service and an uncommonly light touch. No fussing, just that wonderful sense of being in caring, capable hands. It can be especially life-enhancing when you experience such hospitality in more humble places. It happens, and it always happened, nearly without fail, at Baker's Cafeteria. After I became a restaurant reviewer, the memory of my time spent working there served as a kind of standard for the expert, generous, open-hearted spirit I sought in a restaurant. I often thought back to the way this inexpensive workaday spot could consistently make everyone, both the customers and the staff, feel cared for and in good hands. I only ever wanted my readers to experience the same level of care. So I started working at Baker's when I was just shy of 14. My parents were friends with Merle and Eunice Bakers, the founders of Baker's Cafeteria. It was their son, Russ, who I also worked for. And my mom worked as a cashier sometimes at Baker's, and my sister had already gotten a job at Baker's 2 years prior. So it was sort of, really part of the family, kind of. So Baker's was the quintessential mid-century cafeteria. And I want to point out that Baker's is not Bishop's. A lot of people will come up to me and say, Baker's, I loved their French silk pie. And I'm like, we didn't have French silk pie. That was Bishop's. So, and that's, I can see why you'd confuse. They're very much alike. And it's also not Baker's Square, right? Okay, you know that. Okay, good. All right. At the beginning of the line, you pick up your tray and silverware and a choice of napkins, paper, or for 5 cents more, linen. Salads individually plated in little bowls were embedded in crushed ice, and the selection spun slowly on the salad wheel. Spiced apple rings, pickled beets, hard-boiled eggs, iceberg lettuce salad, peach slices, pear halves, cottage cheese with fruit, 3-bean salad, kidney bean salad, and of course, Jell-O salads. Some creamy and fluffy in pastel pinks and light greens, others deeply colored and sparkling like jewels. Next came the selection of 8 or so main dishes. Some were permanent, planks of deep-fried sole, sliced roast beef, and fried chicken. Others rotated in and out regularly. Salmon patties and peas, Swiss steak, Salisbury steak, chicken a la king, a very mild spaghetti and meat sauce, and turkey tetrazzini. Many of these dishes appeared unfailingly on given nights of the week, and the regular clientele would show up on the nights their favorite dishes were in the rotation. Old-timers especially loved the chicken livers and gizzards served on Sundays. At the end of the main dish line were the mashed potatoes with a choice of beef or chicken gravy. The latter was legendary and made from scratch, with pan drippings left over from the equally legendary fried then baked chicken. The bread station offered yeasty, homemade dinner rolls, fresh baked bread sliced from the loaf per order, cornbread, and on Sundays, homemade sweet rolls. A cult favorite of working kids at Baker's was a sweet cinnamon roll slathered with homemade chicken gravy. Teenagers, right? The vegetable section was simple: corn, carrots, spinach, green beans, and perhaps 1 or 2 rotating specialties, such as Harvard beets, scalloped corn, creamed spinach, or creamed peas and new potatoes. And then there were the flaky crust pies, baked fresh each morning, that spun on the pie wheel toward the end of the line. Double-crusted fruit pies like cherry, apple, raisin, blueberry, and raspberry, silky custard pies, meringue-topped pies like lemon meringue and raisin cream, whipped cream-topped pies like banana cream, coconut cream, and chocolate cream. What I loved also about working at Baker's was every single day the kids would get there about a half an hour before we opened, and we'd all sit down and have a dinner together. And it was a huge part of what Baker's to me was all about. It was so much fun because you got to hang out with your friends and have dinner every night that you worked there. And it also, I always think that looking back, you're likely to get satisfaction in serving your customers good food if you have been served good food yourself. I think the Bakers understood this. They also knew that the kids who worked for them were missing dinner with their families at home, because back then nearly everyone had dinner with their families. And so they provided us a substitute. They gave us a family meal when such family meals at home were the norm, but well before family meals in trendy restaurants were cool. What surprises me most when I look back on my time at Baker's was how generously staffed this place was. There would be a line of 3 or 4 girls standing at the end of the buffet ready to take your tray. Tables were bussed the second the guests left, and then there were the adults, keeping a watchful eye on us at every turn. Junice and Merle Baker, who were Mr. and Mrs. Baker to us, and their son, Russ Baker, ran the restaurant, with manager Al Lone and an assistant manager. There were always at least 3 adults on the floor and an adult cooking in the kitchen. We watched as they circled the room with a pot of coffee, stopping to touch each table. We saw them step up and bus a table, the rare moment when a busboy was busy elsewhere. They carried trays. They talked to guests waiting in line to help the time pass more quickly. They watched over us, gently correcting us if we placed a slice of pie, pointing out to the void rather than toward the guest. No matter how busy the restaurant got, and sometimes we'd have lines snaking out the front of the door, the restaurant never became in the weeds or too busy to accommodate a special request. Their standards were high at every single turn. Kids were never in charge. During one of our after-work pie-eating sessions, a boy who had worked in the kitchen complained to our clocked-out group. Oh, by the way, we got to eat free pie after work. That was so much fun. It was like whatever pie was left over on the wheel, we'd get to nab one, and I loved that. Because they didn't. Everything was fresh. They weren't gonna. They might have saved the fruit pies a day because you can do that, but the cream pies done at the end of the day, which was very high standards. So anyway, I was saying that he had cleaned the short order grill a little early that night, being as business had been a little slow. And wouldn't you know, right at 7:30, which was when we closed, someone came in and ordered a hamburger. He had to fire up the grill, cook the burger, and then re-clean the grill. "That's cold," I said. "Couldn't you have told him the grill was closed and he had to order something off the line?" I'm a teenager. Al Lone, the manager, said curtly and decisively, "Well, you could have, but then you would have lost your job." I, along with everyone sitting at that table that night, knew that this was no idle threat. You could not say such a thing to a customer and see another day at Baker's. Their sense of hospitality extended beyond good business. Merle Baker once told my mother that if from her cashier's stand she ever saw someone try to walk out without paying, she should just let them go. They need the food more than I need the money. And yet, the Bakers were on our side too. My mother once told me the backstory of one of the girls I worked with. Lila had tried to get a job at another restaurant in town, but they didn't hire her. Her parents suspected it was because of her slightly unique speech patterns. Rather than have her daughter endure the defeat of applying for a job she wouldn't get, Lila's mother came in and talked to Merle Baker herself, telling him that while her daughter wanted to work, she would not let her daughter go through the heartbreak of applying for a job only to be disqualified again because of the way she spoke. "I'll give her a job," said Merle Baker. He trained her on the adding machine, the job at the end of the line that required you to tally up the price of the food on each customer's tray, meaning you had to memorize all the prices and work very fast. Lila was a whiz at this. The job also required that you interact with just about everyone. Evidently, Mr. Baker had no intention of hiding this smart, charming girl from his customers or making her feel unworthy of being a visible part of the operation. Danny Mayer, the restaurateur I mentioned earlier, is often quoted on the art of hospitality. This is one of my favorites of his many gems on the subject. Hospitality is almost impossible to teach. It's all about hiring the right people. Where do these right people come from? Perhaps there is a kind of hospitality gene. Indeed, in all my years of reviewing, now and then I sensed that some people had it, others didn't. But nurture must come into it too. I was lucky that my family's farm and my family table played such key roles in my early life. I was also lucky that my very first job was at Baker's Cafeteria. I honestly think that Danny Meyer would have been fortunate to hire just about anyone who had spent a stretch of their youth working in this humble but much loved spot, where hospitality wasn't so much taught, but rather became part of the air we breathed. So, Baker's was great, but being a teenager, I don't always make the best decisions, right? And my friends, Cindy and Kirsten, were working at a country kitchen. And I'll tell you how I got that job. So, by the time I was 16, I had worked more than 2 years at Baker's Cafeteria. That changed when, the summer my sophomore year in high school, my friends Cindy and Kirsten started working at a local country kitchen, a 24-hour casual restaurant franchise with a few relatively new outposts in town. They had this annoying jingle on the radio. Just down the road, there's a place like home, country kitchen, where wearing a smile is right in style, country kitchen. Does anybody remember that? That's great. Cindy and Kirsten's hours were much less school-friendly than mine, but the difference was this. When they got off work, they had a pocket full of change, and that change added up. They worked for tips and made twice per hour what I was making. You know, it looked pretty good to me, so put in my notice at Baker's and started going to country kitchen. I went to work serving country boy and country gal combos, burgers or sandwiches with fries and coleslaw, breaded chicken, likely pulled from the freezer and thrown in the fryer, low-grade steaks that came frozen in a box, chef's salads with planks of yellow and white cheese and processed meats, Reubens with corned beef that looked more like bologna, and other stripes of mediocre chain food. So it wasn't only the food that was different than what I had experienced at Baker's, but the management style. With very few exceptions, the Bakers would never let a slew of teenage workers loose on the floor without supervision. But that's exactly what happened at Country Kitchen. Sometimes the manager on duty would disappear into his little windowless office for much of the shift. On the busiest evenings, the place could descend into bedlam, and you'd be left to fend for yourself, arguing with the cooks over incomplete orders, dealing with annoyed patrons whom the indifferent hostess had seated at sticky tables that you hadn't yet had a chance to wipe down, going into the dish room and washing silverware by hand when the dishwashers decided to disappear for a smoke during the middle of a rush. When things broke down, the management's attitude seemed to be, if you want to make your tips, you'll figure it out. No wonder, sometimes when Cindy, Kirsten, and I would drive to work, we'd sing, just down the road, there's a place like hell. So I didn't last too long at the country kitchen. Like, I worked at Baker's for 2 years and some, and I worked at the country kitchen about 5 months. And the reason I quit more than anything, well, it was difficult. It was really hard for me to serve bad food to nice people. It just really grates on you, especially when you're used to serving good food to good people. And that was just something I didn't want to do. So, and they were really nasty about getting time off. Like, if they scheduled you and you couldn't, the Bakers always said school came first. If you needed a night off for a school function, you got the night off. And but Country Kitchen's like, you have to find someone to work for you. And one night I couldn't find someone to work for me. They said, well, if you don't come in, you're fired. And I left. I quit. So I put in a notice for and left. So. My next job then, I applied at Younkers, and you all remember Younkers. Most people here, I think, do. It's that wonderful department store that has been around, was around from like the turn of the 20th century until I think 2017. Wonderful department store, and I worked at the Merle Hay Mall, and the job I got first was in men's furnishings, and so here I am selling ties and handkerchiefs and cologne and shirts, and it's fine, but I'm working from 5 to 9, And if you've worked in restaurants, the time goes like that. When you work in retail, it's like so slow, especially when you're a kid. It's like, this is so boring. And so a friend of mine was working upstairs in the Meadowlark Room, which was the dining room up there, and it was quite a nice restaurant. And she worked there, and she would come down, and on her way out to her car, she'd stop and she'd chat with me a little bit, and she'd complain. My purse is so heavy because of all the tips I made. So there I went. I went like 2 days later. I'm going upstairs to the Meadowlark, and I'm like, "Can I apply for a job?" And the two ladies who worked there were like, "So I told them my experience. They said, "You've done this before, and you want to do it again?" They're like, "Sure, we'll take you." And the neat thing about Younkers, I worked there from the age of 16 to almost the age of 23, as waited tables in the Meadowlark Room and then downtown, and mostly after school during high school, and then in college, whenever I wanted a shift, they'd give me one. They seem to always need help, so I could just call them up and say, "I'm coming in town," and then also during the summer I'd work full time. So it was a great gig, and I worked with great people. And I talk a lot in the book about the food at Younkers. I think it was great. We had the rarebit burgers, the classic burgers with the cheese sauce on it, sticky rolls, those little cinnamon rolls, chicken salad that was made in-house, a really good salad bar. Plus, in the evening, we had a great prime rib special for $2.90. That is $16.42 in today's money. So, that's shockingly cheap for a prime rib dinner, and that included the salad bar and all that. And, but it was a lost leader. They lost money on that, but they wanted you to come into the store and spend money, and it worked. They had it for years. It was totally one of the most popular things they did. So we had great food, and most of it was made from scratch from the tea room downtown, like the soups and everything. And then they'd bring them out twice a day. They'd have a delivery and bring them to the Merle Mall, where they would, we would put them out and serve them then. So it was great food. I mean, it was kind of back to that baker's quality of just very good food. But what I want to talk about Younkers that I loved was the women, the people I worked with. This was a place where I actually, at Baker's I had worked very often with teenagers. We had the managers, but we also had, who were adults, but we had teenagers who we were all, working together. And the Yonkers Merle Mall, I worked very much with teenagers in the evenings a lot, but there were also adults who also waited tables alongside us. And these were like, older people. And I'll just tell you about a couple of them. 50-somethings Anna and Irene were servers of an ilk we'll likely never see again. What struck me most, even back in those days when anyone over 20 was practically invisible to me, was their professionalism. Some days I'd barely comb my hair before throwing on the stupid hairnet I had to wear. But Anna and Irene were always flawlessly groomed with washed and set hair, neat manicures, impeccably applied rouge, face powder and lipstick, and perfect bows on the backs of their aprons. Even though all uniforms were professionally washed and ironed at the end of every day, I would sometimes spot Irene repressing her uniform in the dressing room before her shift because it just wasn't crisp enough. My white waitress shoes would often be so crusted over with spilled food that the managers would have to remind me to wipe them off and blot them with the shoe whitener they kept in their office. But Anna's and Irene's shoes were always spotless. Both had worked at the Meadowlark for so long and were so well respected that regular customers would request their tables. They took especially good care of regular customers who were store clerks working in other departments of Younkers or other stores at the mall. Knowing that clerks' breaks were limited, Irene and Anna would take their orders the minute they sat down, then try to hustle the food from the kitchen as quickly as possible. A former Younkers manager recently gifted me a little booklet, the Younkers Tea Room Waitress Manual. It was written and used long before either of us ever worked for Younkers. But its overall ethos endured well into our time there. On the first page is written, "Art is the doing of anything well. It is not the thing itself, but how it is done that counts. All customers are our guests, and our entire attention should be given to their comfort and convenience. We want the atmosphere of our tea room to be restful and full of cheer so that our guests may go away happier for having dined with us." I don't know if Anna or Irene ever read this manual from the Meadowlark sister restaurant, but it seemed to me that they took those words to heart. I am sure that most everyone they served went away happier for having dined with them. So I loved working for the Meadowlark, and I loved the managers there. I liked working with the older women there, and it wasn't just Anna and Irene. There were very often a lot of women in their 40s and 50s, and it was just nice to have multi-generations. But then on November 5th, 1978, a very awful, tragic thing happened. Younkers, Merle Hay Mall, caught on fire and burned complete, a total loss, and 10 people were killed. It was awful. I wasn't scheduled to work that day, but I was in town that day from the University of Iowa, and I remember looking, before I knew even what it was, I remember looking at the sky, out to the north, and it was all black, and hearing on the news that Younkers had been on fire. And it really hit us all very, very hard, especially with the loss of life. But that also meant that my job at the Meadowlark was I thought, gone, and that was that. But anybody who had been displaced from the Meadowlark could work downtown. So I got to work in the downtown store, and that's another one of those experiences I'm so glad I had, because I worked in that iconic Younkers tea room, which was amazing. And I also worked at their street-level Parkade Pantry, which was a lovely little coffee shop across from the Register and Tribune. Frank Miller used to come in every day and sit at the counter. He was the Register's editorial cartoonist, and he won a Pulitzer Prize. He's legendary. He would turn his placemat over and start drawing the next day's cartoon. So I always got to see that. I mean, so it's just a really cool thing to be part of this, this downtown scene where, businessmen and shop clerks and secretaries and all the people, came in. And the food was equally good. It was the same food we served at the Meadowlark, just in different places. So I worked with full-time adults, there again, and they wanted to do a good job and just go home. And what was also interesting, and so they were just really professional, and I appreciated that, because I didn't mention, I mentioned in the chapters on working in the Meadowlark, there were kids at the Meadowlark who were a little rough around the edges, and they had some shenanigans, and I write about that. But working downtown, I worked with adults, and they all did a good job. But it was also really interesting, was downtown we also had people who were intellectually challenged and even perhaps emotionally troubled that were on the staff. And I talk about a number of these people and how much I was moved by the way others downtown took them under their wings and cared for them. People were really good to each other. And I was as I was writing this chapter, I was thinking to myself, okay, is this nostalgia? Am I just remembering things, through rose-tinted glasses? Were people really that nice down there? And I wrote this. I actually tracked down a former manager. Recently, I got in touch with Donna Nepple Cooper, who oversaw all of the Younkers restaurants during the years I worked there. I asked her if she remembered the way people cared for each other in the same way I did. We were like a small town, she said. She'd know. She grew up in Wall Lake, Iowa, population 800. She told me about other ways in which people cared for each other from the top down. It was a place where a rough-and-tumble sous chef named Buddy could become pals with a polished top Younkers executive named Stanley. And when Buddy fell in love with a waitress named Carmen, Stanley hosted the wedding and the reception in the tea room, inviting everyone who worked there to the afternoon celebration. And on his day off, Buddy would sometimes visit Neva, the octogenarian widow who'd worked in the tea room, and he'd do handyman work for her aging house in the faded glory Riverbend district of Des Moines. Donna told me of Barb, a manager in the Parkade Pantry well before my days there. When Barb became terminally ill with cancer, Younkers continued to pay her salary until she died. They didn't think twice about doing so, said Donna. It's simply what you did back then. And Donna confirmed that Younkers was a place where those with challenges could find work and feel supported. She spoke of Mary, a prep cook we both fondly remembered. Every morning she would pull the chicken from the bones and make homemade mayonnaise for the chicken salad, said Donna. She mentioned others, including 2 table bussers who might also have had intellectual challenges, and how they became loyal and appreciated members of the staff. And earlier in this chapter, I just talk about another woman who, it took me a while to figure it out, but she couldn't read. And, and so that, there were people there who really did have special needs that Younkers took care of. This care of employees, it pervaded everything, right down to the servers at the street-level coffee shop who made sure lonely older women got extra attention and down-and-out men got enough to eat, a newspaper to read, and plenty of coffee. So Younkers, again, was great, and I feel like I feel incredibly fortunate to have worked there and to work in a place that really did care for people like that, and that I would leave, and then I'd come back 6 months later, and year after year, the same people worked there, which is great. It shows you that people took care, of their employees enough for people to stick around. But I said that I worked at Younkers from the age of 16 to about 23, but there was like a 4 or 5 month stretch where I left Younkers and worked at the Soup Kitchen, which was a vegetarian restaurant downtown, and it was super groovy. And I just wanted to try something new. I eventually went back to Younkers because, again, tips. Soup Kitchen didn't have tips. But I'll tell you a little bit about the Soup Kitchen. In 1977, the area around Drake University in Des Moines swelled with all kinds of thriving offbeat venues. The creaky old buildings, originally home to businesses like hardware stores, meat markets, bakeries, shoe repair shops, and newsstands, now buzzed with record shops, head shops, natural food stores, a greasy spoon or two, and quirky bars and restaurants with names like Beggar's Banquet, Mustard's Last Stand, So's Your Mother's, and the Blind Munchies. The grooviest of them all was the Soup Kitchen. This vegetarian restaurant was housed in a long, narrow, 2-story old brick storefront with apartments on the top floor. The building looked like it had once been a mom-and-pop grocery. Inside, it still had the original wooden floors and stamped tin ceilings. The owners, Glenn and Grace, hung leafy plants from macrame hangers in the windows. They furnished the dining room with mismatched wooden chairs and tables, a bright orange upright piano, and a jungle mural painted floor to ceiling along the one long side of the wall by artist Mindy Miller, the daughter of the Des Moines Register's Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist Frank Miller. So let's talk about a little bit about the food. And the food, okay, so never mind that carob tasted like wax. They didn't use chocolate, they used carob. And bean sprout sandwiches on heavy whole wheat bread sometimes had me craving a hot dog. The menu might seem a little bit earnest and basic when today there's gochujang and coconut milk, miso paste, and kimchi readily available to make meatless dining truly sing. But back then, it all tasted fresh and novel and wholesome. I still crave the Soup Kitchen's broccoli soup, the super rice, which was this wonderful casserole of brown rice, fresh sauteed vegetables, and like a bechamel sauce. It was so good. And with some cheese on top. The gorgeous sparkling salads with vegetables that truly tasted of themselves. I loved raw vegetable juice so much that I bought a Champion juicer. So, I mean, what I loved about the Soup Kitchen for me, it was like, it's 1977, and, I'm still just a teenager, and, there are all these hippies in their 20s, and they just seem so cool to me, and I'm kind of, I just think it's so cool. They play, here at Baker's, we, add like, old music, Satin Doll and all that stuff playing on the speaker. And here I'm at Baker's and they're playing Pink Floyd, and it's just so, it just felt really groovy. And I think at the time I thought that it felt worlds away from the other restaurants I had worked in. Restaurants sometimes run by old school boss ladies and imperious middle-aged men, and I'm talking about the country kitchen there, and occasioned by peoples my parents' age who treated me like the hopelessly green youth that I was. When I was within the walls of that old storefront building at the Soup Kitchen, I could actually convince myself that the Soup Kitchen was a kind of utopia, or at least its own wonderful little self-contained world. And then one day, the two worlds collided. On a late Saturday afternoon in spring, a middle-aged woman dressed in a smart houndstooth suit walked in and stared at the menu overhead. Likely seeing nothing that struck her fancy, she asked if we served tuna salad sandwiches. A little too high, I think, on the righteousness of vegetarianism and the hipness of this world that lay so far out of the realm of smart houndstooth suits. I told her that we did not serve tuna fish. We are a vegetarian restaurant. I'm aware of that, she said politely, but some vegetarians do eat fish. Her kind smile faded along with, I imagine, her hope that she had chosen the right place to eat. No fish here, I'm afraid, I said, lightly with a shrug. I'm a teenager. While I felt a pang of guilt as she turned and walked away, the memory saddens me even more with each year that passes. I often think how easy it would have been for me to make her feel welcome. All it would have taken was to suggest a sandwich she might like, grilled cheese or avocado veggie or egg salad. I knew that any of the real adults who worked at the soup kitchen would have done just about anything to make the lady in the checkered suit feel at home. Good heavens, they probably would have walked across the street and bought her a steak if she wanted one. For if there was any thread that linked the soup kitchen to the other, more square restaurants of the time, it was that nobody ever mistreated customers. They didn't even complain about customers, even when well out of earshot. Looking back, I think there was an overall understanding among those of us who worked at the soup kitchen that there would be plenty of people who would walk in the door and feel out of place in our small slice of infinitely cool counterculture. The ethos was firm. Everyone was welcome in this club. No one had to explain this to me. It was as organic as the carrots I peeled and juiced day after day, which was why tuna fish lady's disappointment pained me so much. I knew better. I soon left the soup kitchen. I was headed off to college and needed to make some real money. I went back to waitressing for tips, making 2 or 3 times more than at the soup kitchen could pay me. Yet my time there made me a better server. Tuna fish lady's look of defeat as she turned and walked out the restaurant was something I never wanted to see again. So that's basically my experiences working in what I consider pretty iconic restaurants in Des Moines. You know, you have your, Baker's, was iconic. The tea room, especially, but also the street level coffee shop. We don't have those street level coffee shops anymore, which was the Parkade Pantry. And then you had your groovy hippie restaurant, and then you had the, sort of not very great chain that started populating our landscape. So I really did get a experience in basically all levels of restaurant. And even after college, I worked in fine dining at a country club, and I was trained in high-end French style service. So I sort of saw the gamut. And so, I've seen what we had, and then I reviewed restaurants for 25 years. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what we've lost and what we've gained. I think I'll start with what we've lost. And I'd like to hear from you, because we'll open this up in a few minutes to the rest of you. I think we've really lost a watchful presence. I miss going to a restaurant and seeing an eagle-eyed owner, the manager, or maitre d'. It's a rarity to see someone overseeing a dining room with that meticulous attention that I always admired at Baker's and other restaurants. Those individuals made every guest feel welcome, noticed, and really looked after. I miss the training and expertise. So many servers today lack the foundational knowledge of how to provide seamless service. It's not their fault. High turnover and staffing shortages leave restaurateurs scrambling to keep operations afloat, let alone invest in proper training. I want to read you, just by contrast, a short paragraph about Guido's. Anybody remember Guido's? I once asked my friend Stephen Volkmer Jones, a longtime restaurant industry professional, about the prime rib cart at Guido's, located in the Savory Hotel, with plush half-moon booths, white tablecloths, and the tuxedoed proprietor running the place. This was the finest downtown restaurant in the 80s and early 90s. Stephen had worked there as a maitre d' for many years, and his recollections spoke to how much things had changed by the late 1990s and early 2000s. Stephen told me, the stainless steel and rosewood prime rib cart was a big feature at Guido's. The cart was wheeled as near to the table as possible, at first only Guido carved, then he taught me how he wanted it done. He watched over my shoulder for 2 years until he felt I knew all I needed to know about it. The night he let me carve on my own was a milestone of trust. Where did that level of front of the house exactitude go? So I miss that. The seasoned professional. I miss seeing older, experienced servers in their 40s and 50s and beyond. They brought wisdom, poise, and a reassuring sense of calm to the dining experience. Their presence instilled confidence in diners and the staff alike. I miss the deep sense of care. Places like Baker's or the Younkers restaurants had an almost magical ability to make you feel cared for the moment you stepped through the door. Contrast that with a recent visit to a popular downtown hotspot where the host, who was a young man, was scrolling on his phone behind the host stand. And when he saw me, he glanced up at me and waited for me to speak first. And I thought, at first I was like annoyed, and then I thought, poor thing, there's no one here to show you how it's done. I had that at every restaurant I worked at, except the Country Kitchen. They showed you how it was done. And also a sense of belonging. Spots like both Baker's and the Soup Kitchen, there was a palpable sense of camaraderie, like you were part of something special. Today, social media has created a divide, often making customers feel unwelcome or adversarial. A mild complaint about lukewarm food or a polite request can leave you feeling as though you've crossed a line. The restaurants I knew never made guests feel anything but valued. And I don't know if you've been on social media lately, but there are a lot of sites there with servers talking about how awful their customers are. And very often, I don't think the customers are that awful. I just think you're in the wrong job. You know, you should not fault a customer for being a customer. You know, of course you have to treat everybody with respect and dignity, but you also should, get that in return. So anyway, so on that, what's better now? There's no question. The food today is leagues ahead of what we had in the 1970s. The restaurants I worked back then had wonderful, honest, home-style fare, meals I'd love to see again. But look where we are now. We have a world of flavors. Back then, Mexican meant chi-chis. Now we have vibrant array of options, great Mexican food, Indian, Asian, Southeast Asian, Peruvian, Middle Eastern, Ethiopian. Even Italian food has undergone a renaissance with flavors and dishes far beyond what once defined the genre. The craft beer effect. The craft beer revolution transformed casual dining. Once diners started caring about the quality of their beer, they wanted food that matched. Burgers and fries are no longer the default. Today's menu are more creative and thoughtful. And the evolution of fine dining. When I started reviewing restaurants in 1997, fine dining was a predictable affair. Steak Diane, shrimp scampi, those were the pinnacle of fine dining. Over the past 25 years, I've watched it evolve into something dynamic and ambitious. Today's food is fresh, surprising, globally inspired, and locally sourced. It's been thrilling to have a front row seat as chefs have redefined what's possible. And there's also the farm-to-table movement. At our best restaurants, menus celebrate farmers, and these days there are restaurants that not only do farm-to-table dining, but have brought the table to the farm. We've got Wilson's Orchard in Cumming, that is in the middle of, set on the side of a farm, as well as LT Organic Restaurant in Waukee, which has been doing this for 20 years. Shame on me, I really recently discovered it. So in conclusion, my wish would be to merge that sense of connection and warm hospitality that the restaurants of the 70s embodied with the extraordinary food that we have today. It does happen in some places. There are some places where you do get both. And I will continue to celebrate those places where we don't eat just well, but feel truly nourished in every sense of the word. Thank you. So I'd love to open this up to questions and comments too. I mean, if you want to, talk about what you think is better, worse, just anything, questions or comments. Anyone? Yes.
What is one restaurant you wish could come back?
I wish Baker's would come back. I really do. I seriously, Vicki, I'm not just saying that because you're here. I mean, sometimes I'm driving around at about, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm like, I just like to go in and get their Salisbury steak. And just something really simple, sit down, eat something, leave, and not spend a whole lot of money, and be treated well. I miss it. I really do. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
You think Bishop's kind of matched?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm partial to Baker's. I mean, Bishop's was a regional chain, and and Baker's was only in Des Moines. So I think they were able to kind of keep a handle on everything better. They, I think at the time I worked there, they only had 2 restaurants. At one time, I think they might have had 3. So, yeah. So it wasn't like this huge, corporate thing. So.
Our customers would go from one to the other. They go back and forth.
That's right. So did you hear what Vicki said? She said, yeah, some customers go from one to the other. And, wasn't it awful when those horrible old country buffets and Royal Fork buffets and all-you-can-eat places came? Those were just horrible. Comparatively, there was no niceties. People didn't carry your tray. You just dished up your own food from the troughs. And it wasn't good food. So, all right. Yes?
Will you clarify where the bakers were? Because I'm not sure in my mind if I'm thinking of Bishop's.
Baker's was at Sherwood Forest, yes, and that's on Hickman and 63rd. And
Before that, we were on University between 24th and 25th down by Critic.
I remember that too, yeah.
We opened there in 1950.
So she just said, in case you didn't hear it, that they had a restaurant in the Drake area on University, and that they opened in 1950. Yes, and you also had one out on Southeast 14th. That was I worked there first. They were just opening that, and they needed warm bodies, so I was there. Yeah. So, other questions? Yes.
Who would you think are the movers and shakers in today's Des Moines food metro area?
Oh, you mean chefs? Chefs or some tours, or yeah.
Entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs. Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that boy. It's hard. I'm trying to think. I'm really impressed right now with anybody who's doing somewhat casual food that's really, really, really good. And I think Guest House Tavern and Oyster, Derek Eidson, who is he was the chef at Centro and Django, and now he does this kind of a nouveau supper club sort of thing. And it's really good, and I just admire him and what he's doing for keeping a kind of a casual price, but giving you a really nice time for it. Oh, that's way out in Waukee on University. It's like at the edge, like right before Des Moines becomes Waukee. Way out there. Guest House. It's good. It's very good. Yeah, I mean, I think I admire anyone who can continue to give people a really good experience at. Without, everybody spending $100 a person, which is just starting to be kind of starting to happen. Yeah. Your question, please?
There seems to be a trend in designing food on your plate.
Yeah.
When you have things sticking up, and can you speak to that?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. So in addition, I don't know if you know, I have a newsletter every week that comes out, and it talks about the Des Moines dining scene and sometimes regional dining scene. I just wrote an article about that very thing, about how chefs are starting to get away from that sort of intricate, what we called tweezer food, where you need, 10 chefs, trying to tweeze the food into place, and more into sort of gratifying, hearty food, but equally really well thought out too. I mean, not, and so I interviewed 2 James Beard winning chefs in Kansas City, as well as a great chef in Iowa City, about this trend, because these people had all done those little fancy plates, and now they're like, we just want to serve good food. We just want to serve people what food people like. And they're also older chefs. These chefs I spoke to are in their 50s, and one's even 64. And he said, when you're young, you're cooking for sort of awards. You're cooking for critics. But when you're old, you're cooking for the customer. So it's less about ego and more about really gratifying people. And I really appreciate that. It's coming around. So I think it's a great question, because it's just something I wrote about last week. So, yes, Gail.
From online, what do you think the next hot thing is going to be in the metro? The next hot ingredient, country, food?
Oh, that's a great question.
This person mentioned, 5 years ago there was no Korean, and now we
Oh, yeah.
Korean fried chicken.
Exactly. That's a really good point. Yeah, I don't know. It might be what I'm talking about. I think we're going to go away from small plates and all those intricate little foods. I could be wrong, but I think people are going to gravitate more towards, what I call it refined heartiness. So it's really good food, but it's hard. It's not just piling on the pasta. It's not just adding a bunch of garlic mashed potatoes. It's equally refined, but it's also hearty. I bet we're going to see more and more people do that, and I think we might even start seeing it. But two of the restaurants, one in Iowa City and one in Kansas City, were places that did family style, where you ordered enough food for the table, and like we had a veal chop that came. It was a huge veal chop and sliced into like 6 pieces with other things, and you just served yourself like you were at grandma's table. And I think that might come around. I think people are starting to look, we kind of appreciate that. It's also just more convivial. Yes.
I think to your point, though, when you mentioned like guest house, and now we're seeing supper club concept going back into
Val Air.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also a trend that's coming back. People kind of craving that supper club atmosphere again.
I think you're right. I think they're starting to crave a little more warmth. Yeah. I think they want that sense of hospitality. Maybe that's just wish fulfillment on my part, because that's what I want so much. So, but you see it starting to come back around. Yeah. Yes.
I've been impressed the last 10 years with the explosion of really good restaurants in Des Moines, but now I worry, can they all survive?
They've been asking that question a few years now. It wasn't long ago a restaurateur told me that there is going to be a sort of a collapse, that that at some point it's going to be like when the stock market crashes, restaurants are going to crash. Suddenly they're just because they don't think it's sustainable, and I don't think it is either. And Vicky's daughter Kelly told me even back in the 70s, Russ would say there are too many restaurants. Russ Baker would say that, and that was the 70s. There weren't that many restaurants in the 70s, but now look at all the restaurants. There are too many, and I just don't think they can get the help and the quality that they need to get, and it's a shame. So,
way back when Russ was still around, in some of the magazines, the restaurant magazines, the average life of a restaurant was 1 year.
A year. Wow. The average life of a restaurant was a year. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm sorry, did you have a question back there? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious. One thing I enjoy doing is the multi dishes, like events. So like Moxie has one. I think there's some other restaurants that have done it. So I was curious, is that something that's new, or has that always been around, kind of?
You mean multi-courses? Yeah, multi-courses. I mean, that's a real European way of dining. I'd kind of like to see it go back, because I mean, what we started doing here a lot was you'd sit down at the table, and then you'd order a bunch of onion rings, or all these different just huge appetizers that you'd sort of all pick at. Where the European model is everybody gets their first course, everybody gets their second course, everybody gets maybe a cheese course, and everybody gets dessert. You don't just throw a bunch of food at the table. And I love that style of dining. I'd love to see more of it. And again, the restaurants that I profiled in my Substack, or my newsletter, those restaurants do that kind of dining, and I love it. Yeah. Yes.
For me, I'm thinking of 2 impediments in many restaurants to having the kind of experience that you're talking about, and I think we all crave. One is the noise level.
Oh yeah.
And I just can't help but think that there's some attitude somewhere that is cool,
mm-hmm.
To be noisy.
Mm-hmm.
But when you want to go to a restaurant to talk with friends and so forth, it becomes hard. The other is probably smaller, but its menus are too small.
And maybe too dark. You can't get out your flashlight. No, I agree with the noise, and that's not just an older person's thing. I couldn't stand noisy restaurants even in my 30s. They drove me crazy, and I was like, I'm here to talk to people, and a restaurant should never make you feel uncool. And the first thing you feel is uncool. Can you turn the music down? You don't want to be that person. Yes.
Yeah, we were at Boom Hot this last week, a group of us, and it was so loud.
Yeah.
You hear across the table talk.
I know.
And we asked the waitress if she could turn it down, I don't think she was able to.
Yeah,
And
sometimes.
I'm going to recommend it to somebody else, but now I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just corporate controlled. We're going to have it. We're going to have the restaurant at this level. You know, whatever. So, well, okay. I'll take one more question, and then because I know everybody has things to do. But if you have more questions and you want to ask me something personally, feel free to come up and talk to me. But yes.
When you were doing reviews, did one stand out among all of them, like one you got the most comments about?
Comments?
Or just one that was really good?
I think a long time ago in 1997, about 6 weeks into writing I had just taken over the Datebook Diner column, and I thought, I'm going to be reviewing steaks and onion rings forever. and it was like, I can't, and then Bistro 43 opened, and they just changed everything. It was like there were other restaurants that had tried to do sort of the chef-driven, fresh, global, local, seasonal, this really interesting food, but they hadn't quite succeeded. This place had staying power, and I always say every few years a restaurant comes on the scene and sort of like cracks it open. And Bistro 43 did that and paved the way for other people to do that. And I admired them so much. They were great. So, all right, I just want to tell you a couple things. I've got some books. I've got Love is My Favorite Flavor, which this talk came out of, but it also covers a lot about what it was like to be the critic. I have the Little Women cookbook, which if anybody is a fan of the book Little Women, this takes all of the food that's mentioned throughout the novel. There's tons of food in that novel. I researched 19th century cookbooks and found the kind of food that they mentioned in the novel and the kind of food they would have eaten there, and then I updated it for today because nobody wants to cook with fish bladders to thicken your food. But I do give a lot of history of that. And then I have my Everyday French Cooking book, which basically I traveled, I talk about it in this book, that, for 25 years, for 25 summers, I went to France for a good chunk of the summer and spent a lot of time there renting an apartment and kind of learning. One of the things I did is cook a lot. And I read a lot of women's magazines. I, talked to people and kind of every day, what do French people really cook at home versus what we eat when we go to a restaurant. So that's what that book's about. And I'm happy to answer further questions if you want to come up and talk to me a little bit. So anyway, yes?
Is there still a Datebook Diner?
No, they got rid of the Datebook Diner.
Did they get rid of the Datebook too?
Yes, they got rid of the Datebook. And that makes me so sad. Didn't you love the Datebook? It was like everything right there. Now you have to go all over, the information's there, but you have to search so hard. So, but remember, I come up and get my card, because I do a weekly newsletter that tells you, I review restaurants, I interview people, chefs, I do all kinds of, food news and insights. So I'm still doing what I do. I'm just doing it on a different platform. So, yeah. So, all right. Anyway, thank you again. Yeah, thanks, Gail.
Welcome. All right, I want to thank you all so much. Dave, get out of the way. For coming. Just so you know, and you're the first people to know this because it's not official, the Valor Ballroom has approached the Historical Society about doing a special deal for members of the Historical Society. I don't know what exactly it's going to look like in their new restaurant. So if you're not a member of the West Des Moines Historical Society, here's another reason to join us and support us. If you would like to become part of what we do, I'm having a volunteer orientation this Wednesday at 5:30 to 6:30 at the Jordan House. If you're interested in doing anything from admin work to helping weed the garden, we need you, and we would absolutely love your help and assistance. And the next Iowa Files, that is on Sunday, February 9th, so a little earlier than usual. It's going to be all about the Underground Railroad. So Barry Jurgensen, pardon me, the Midwest Regional Manager of the National Park Service's Network to Freedom, which the Jordan House is part of, will be in to talk about the Underground Railroad in Iowa, and I'm sure he will mention the Jordan House a couple of times if he knows what's good for him. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your support, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you all.